Hello, everybody. Again, welcome to our 3 o'clock session. I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to Nicole. Thank you, Nicole.
All right. Thank you. Charlene, can you see my screen, Charlene?
Yes, I can. And we may need you to speak up a little bit.
All right. I'm going to just use my headphones just to be on the safe side.
Okay.
These ones might be a little bit better. All right. How is that?
Okay, that's better.
Okay, good. All right, let's go. Let's go with these headphones. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've been enjoying the miniVAte Virginia conference, and we're in the home stretch, so stick with me. So I have this quote up on the screen, and I just want you to think about it for a second. You don't have to see the whole picture or the whole staircase, sorry. You just have to take the first step. And you might be wondering now, what does that have to do with scaling agility at all? But I just want you to focus and think what this conjures up in your mind. And then just keep that in your back pocket, and we'll come back to it in a little bit. Okay. All right, so today, yes, I am here to talk to you about factors for Agile scaling success. And I hope you will find this useful. But before we get into that, I will give you a little background about me. I am Nicole Spence-Goon. I'm an Agile coach at Excella, which is a tech firm that helps organizations solve big tech problems, as well as evolving the way they work. And I've been working in software development and in IT for over 20 years in many different roles. I've been a developer, I've been a tester, I've been a business analyst, scrum mastering, coaching, the whole gamut. And I entered the world of government and Agile at about the same time, a little over 10 years ago. Before that, I worked primarily in the private sector in the financial market. I'm also a co-organizer for the DC Women in Agile group, which is part of the Global Women in Agile organization. And I'm a core team member for the Agile Alliance Initiative, Agile in Color. The other thing I like to say is that I like to live a life of learning because there are many opportunities to learn something new. And I've picked up a few trinkets, as I like to call them, along the way. So that's a little bit about me. Now let's talk about you. So I am going to share in the chat a Menti code to just get a poll for, get an idea of who's in the session. So let me bring up the Menti screen here. So what I want to see is like what's everybody's Agile scaling experience right now? Are they on an Agile project, or, trying to get a gauge of how many teams they're working with? This is just to find out who I have out there in the virtual audience right now. All right, so also set the clock just to give people a chance to respond. So there are few people with 2 to 3 teams, okay. And 10 plus teams, okay. All right. I think this would probably be the first time that I've had that there aren't any folks that aren't on an Agile project. So this will be a different good mix of people. All right. So right now we're kind of like half, about 2 to 3 teams. Okay. Awesome. I think we're kind of slowing down now. So I will close this voting. All right, cool. Thank you for participating. So at least I have an idea of what you're dealing with in your Agile scaling life before I press on. All right, so let's go a little further. So now that I know a little about you, I'll share with you a little bit about my scaling experience. All right, so I have been in the government space for a while, and I've worked with about 8 different government agencies on 10 different Agile initiatives. But in terms of Agile scaling initiatives, this talk is going to speak to what I learned in 5 of those agencies. But the content really can apply to any organization, not just government. So today you'll hear me speak about Department of Justice, Secret Service, Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts, and USCIS, as well as Department of Veteran Affairs. And the work that I did at these agencies used the different scaling approaches. Some use SAFe, some use less, some use something custom. But that really didn't influence any specific outcome or pattern. So here's a lay of the land. We're gonna go on this journey, which is like a virtual hike. And while we're on this journey, you're gonna understand the 3 factors that I discovered that impact your ability to scale agility effectively for your organization. And as I describe each one, I will give you an example of an anti-pattern that I've seen, which I'm calling valleys, and an example of where this factor was applied successfully, which I'm calling peaks. Now, as we explore, the secret sauce here to keep in mind is about taking yourself off autopilot and to be more intentional. Why? So that your teams and leaders can be more engaged and more empowered. So this is harking back to the quote that I had at the beginning, which is really about you don't have to see the whole picture, you just have to take action, take that first step. All right. So regardless of the framework I happened to be working in at the time, here are a few factors that have stood out to me. You need to consistently communicate your vision. You need to generally focus on your people. And you need to be intentional about creating your own path. Now, what does all of that really mean? Let's get into that. And we'll start by communicating your vision consistently. So to keep moving forward, you have to know what your goals are and where you want to take your product or program that you're building. Sometimes organizations can be focused on agile transformation, but is that really your goal? Your organization doesn't exist to become agile. Agile is just a mechanism to get you where it's just a better way to get you where you want to go, right? And so the first step is really crafting a vision. Well, now that you've captured that, you have to communicate that out, whether it's a single product with many teams or a program that spans your organization. And this is especially important in a scaled environment because teams need to stay focused around a common goal and have the ability to act cohesively, even as they work as independent teams. The vision also helps to tie together operational planning all the way down to the daily decisions that any team will make. All right, so you're communicating your vision, but now you need to keep it out in front of your teams on a regular basis. It's not a one and done thing. You have to keep sharing your vision as a constant reminder of what the plan is so that you can stay on track and avoid going off the rails. Consistency in communicating your vision is also important as your vision evolves. You know, things change, and as your goals change, your teams need to be aware of that so they're not operating from yesterday's paper. I like to compare this concept to flossing. You know you should do more of it in order to have healthier gums and also to keep your dentist from nagging you, which is my particular case. All right, so now we're going to go and look at the examples of how I came to this place. So in the Valley, here's an example of an anti-pattern that I witnessed, which is no consistent understanding of project purpose. So for some context, for this project, I was on one of many teams that was using the SAFE approach. The lead product owner role was muddled in the midst of lots and lots of stakeholders. There was a product vision, but it was communicated to teams only once during PI planning. And that could be like one time in the span of 3 or 4 months at best. Also, during PI planning, the vision wasn't the only thing that the teams had to focus on. So the message of the vision got lost very easily in all the information we had to consume and all of the things that we had to do on our PI planning days. So as a result, with so many other activities to focus on, the vision was not the shining guidance star of planning that it should have been. And as times and iterations passed, we would instead focus on keeping those stakeholders happy, whether it was in line with the vision or not. So what I learned from this experience was that the vision needed to be shared regularly to help guide decisions and to keep our teams focused on what we were collectively trying to achieve. And since it was in a safe environment, one possibility we could have done was having the release train engineer or the scrum masters work with product management to make the vision a consistent reminder on what work was essential and what was nice to have. All right, so now let's climb up out of the valley and ascend to the peak. And in this example, we're speaking about developing a product vision statement to guide decisions. So here at USCIS and Secret Service, I had one product owner with many teams. First, I worked with the product owner to develop a product vision statement. In this week, I conducted a workshop that involved the product owner, a business analyst, a tech lead, and used a template to help them formulate their vision statement that they could communicate to the teams and to stakeholders. And then we also used the vision statement as an information radiator. It was basically plastered anywhere the teams could reference it. At that time we were co-located, so I had it in the team room, on their SharePoint site, and pretty much anywhere that they would show up on a regular basis, I tried to keep it in front of them. And then the product owner also used the vision statement to help develop a roadmap, and it guided him in making MVP decisions. It was also used as a reference during sprint planning. So it framed priority discussions between the product owners and the teams, and it also helped the teams stay on track with goals. So what was the result of all of this? Well, because the product owner was key in creating this vision statement, they had more ownership of their goals. And they could use this as a tool to focus future conversations with teams and with stakeholders regarding the roadmap. And then having regular reminders helped the team stay focused on what really needed to be done. It accomplished what I'd like to say made everyone feel like we were moving in the same direction, which is really important for keeping people aligned in a scaled environment. And it also helped the development teams make technical decisions about architecture. When they knew what was most important to the PO and the PO's goals, they made different choices than they would have without that guidance. And then the constant reference to the vision helped the product owner and the teams determine what was MVP, especially in the context of having time constraints. But I'm sure none of your projects ever have any time constraints whatsoever. Wink, wink. All right, so now I'm gonna take a break and I want to put you guys into some breakout rooms to talk a little bit about vision. So what I'm going to do first is I will put these questions in the chat. So you have it for reference. And then I will make sure that we have everybody in a room. That's the one other thing I have to make sure of. All right. Just give me a moment. So this is what we're going to be discussing. We're going to discuss, first, we're going to discuss, do you have a vision for the project that you're currently on? And if you do, has it helped? Is there any way to make it more useful? And then if no, what do you see as the biggest obstacle? And how do you think you can overcome those barriers? So I'm about to make sure I have everybody in a room. I think I do. And I make sure at least there's a couple of people in each room so that it's not too unbalanced. And I've got to move one more person around. All right, I think I've gotten everybody in a room. All right, so I'm going to open up the rooms and give you all about 7 minutes to talk a little bit about this and just share your experiences. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open up the rooms. Let's see. All right, Karen's got her room. All right. Cool. All right. Breakout rooms are always a bit tricky, but I think you managed it. Let's see. Oh, a few people coming back.
Hey, Nicole, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I was in breakout room 8, and since my partner left the meeting,
Oh,
it was.
okay. Let me move you to room 7 because there's some people over there while there's still time. Yep.
Certification. I work with somebody who is in marketing at Capital One. So,
See, people are coming back. I know it goes really fast. Does anybody want to share any kind of highlight or learning they had from their little conversation? I know it was very brief. Either you can always put it in the chat if you have anything that you want to share, because I know that we have time limits and I would really love to get into the discussion a little bit more. But I'm going to go ahead and move through the rest of the factors that I wanted to cover today. All right. Let me get on it here. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the second factor. Focus on your people genuinely. So due to the sheer number of people involved in any agile scaling endeavor, centralized decision-making is not very effective. Think bottlenecks, right? So taking decision-making power down to the individual team level is critical to be responsive to the changing needs that you'll encounter on any project. And then leaders can say they support teams making decisions, but they really need to put their money where their mouth is and not try to yank back control when they get a little nervous or spooked. You know, as a leader, you need to provide support to create true empowerment for the teams. And then leaders can also do their part by creating a collaborative environment that fosters cooperation and connection between the teams so that they stay in sync and that they don't accidentally stunt progress by sitting in their own silos. So I like to compare this factor to like someone, that you're asking someone, how are you? And they actually tell you the truth of how they're really doing, but you didn't really want to know. So we don't want to do that. We want to be genuine and are invested in our folks. So just keep that in mind. All right, let's jump into the examples. Okay, here, Dilbert is giving us an example of not being particularly people focused. I say command and control much? Perhaps. Needless to say, I hope nobody's in this kind of environment. All right, so for this context, this project I was on was made up of all distributed teams. There was a governance team that made all of the decisions, and the teams themselves made absolutely no decisions themselves. And so as a result, the teams really had no sense of ownership because the decisions that were made by the governance team weren't always the best for those teams. So here's one example of what happened while I was there. I was participating in a retrospective, but it wasn't very productive because the improvements were dictated and not discussed. So they were dictated by the Scrum Master at the time, and we didn't have a discussion about it. And so as a team, we had no sense of ownership in our continuous improvement. And also, there was a general sense of apathy. For the team I was on, even though we weren't co-located, um, there were some people who were in the same building. And for those folks who were in the same building, we didn't even attend stand up together. Everyone just called in. So, needless to say, this environment did not inspire creative solutions. So, what I discovered is the teams need a little bit of autonomy. You know, they need some input into how decisions are made or what decisions are made to have some skin in the game. And then, you know, leadership needed to develop some level of trust in the teams and create a collaborative environment so that teams could make decisions on their own. And there's more at stake when you have multiple teams that are not on the same page. You know, if they're disengaged and detached, there's a more opportunity for things to fall through the cracks, and those things can cause delays, and those delays can create a ripple effect. So it's really important to get everyone on the same page. All right, so in this example at the peak of applying people focus, this was at USCIS. And when new teams were established, leadership allowed team members to pick their own teams. So it was a self-selection process. But before they even did that, everyone came together to define what it meant to be a team and came up with a definition of ready to be a team based on skill set. And then once they did that, they self-identified which team they would join. They also made decisions about tech structure, coding standards, pipeline health, developing some refactoring norms, and how to share information across teams. And then they did a lot of experimenting. So at USCIS, they experimented with Scrum of Scrums. They had team reps show up at the Scrum of Scrums meeting to share blockers, you know, any dependencies in between the teams, any discoveries or changes in implementation, or any other hot topics that were coming up at the time. And at Secret Service, they experimented by keeping separate backlogs. For inter-team communication, they used scouts who would show up at each other's stand-up meetings to share information that way. And then they had joint refinement sessions to do information sharing at that level. And they also drove their own test automation experiment that one team was doing, but the other teams weren't. And they decided to use SonarQube to improve their code quality. And then at DOJ, the Scrum teams got to be responsible for their own epic decomposition for the epics that they were working on, as opposed to that being done by the program team. So these were just a couple of different examples of how they were empowered. And then management support for this would happen to just eliminate any blockers that the teams could not handle themselves. And all of this resulted in, you know, having the teams feel more ownership for what they were building, because they had, you know, the decisions that were made were theirs, whether they were decisions at the individual team level or collectively. And then once they saw some positive results from the decisions they got to make, they became more invested in the project's success. And at all of these agencies, the team level decision-making also benefited leadership, because then they were able to delegate some of that responsibility, you know, whether it was about communication methods, technical improvements, or refinement process. And with the team's growth, leadership deepened their trust in the team's judgment. All right, so we're gonna do another poll here. So let me make sure that I will post again in the chat the link for Mentee. And we're going to talk a little bit about team decision making. Let me move to the next slide. All right, so now I want you to share with me a little bit about team decision making. So just one or two thoughts. Type in and tell me what kind of decisions your teams can make now. I'll give you a minute to kind of type stuff in so they can make decisions about stories. Okay. Workload. Continuous improvement, coding practices, okay. Meeting times, standards, technical plans, time off, scope, okay. A couple more people on meeting times, capacity. All right, how much to commit to? Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that. All right, now we're gonna talk about what are the things you wish your teams could make decisions about. We'll set the timer here for this. Let's see if there's anything if there's anything that they can't make decisions about now that they wish they could. So feature assignment. Team structure, demo, feature design, timelines, yeah. Architecture, okay. Team makeup, timelines, getting bigger. Vision, assignment of work. Strategic planning, scheduling. Promises to customers. Yeah, that's a big one. All right, now for the final question. So for the things you just said you wished your teams could make decisions about, what is the cost of not having them right now? So what impact is that having on your teams? I'll start the countdown for this one. Confusion, stress, confusion, dissatisfaction, disengagement, stressed teams, lots of stress happening, disengagement, dissatisfaction, slow to market, attrition. Yeah. It's cost to happiness, lower morale. Yeah. Okay, thank you for sharing. So I want you to keep this in your mind. We'll circle back to this at the end, but I quickly want to go through the last factor before I open it up. All right, so let me switch over here. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the last factor, which is create your own path intentionally. So here I'm going to say, start with a lightweight foundational scaling structure. That it's just enough to keep your teams connected and focused on their common goals. But ultimately, less is more. Having less of a predefined structure allows you to customize more. And then no two organizations operate the exact same way. Therefore, scaling agility in your organization really can't be one size fits all. You know, whatever approach you do use, it needs to be customized to your organization. And then as your teams explore and experiment, you should do the same with your scaling approach. Regularly inspect and adapt your foundational structure and kind of incorporate new methods and techniques that have been successful, and then remove the ones that haven't worked. But the continual adaptation of your approach is key to be responsive to the changing needs of your organization or your project. So think of this factor kind of like buying the highest rated backpack that you want to use for a hike. You know, everybody rated it really high and said it was the greatest thing since sliced bread, but it doesn't fit you. It's too heavy. So even though everyone else says it's great, it's just not fitting you. So that's kind of how to think about this. So let's get into the examples. So a trap preventing you from creating your own path is really having a very prescriptive framework, but with no deviations whatsoever. And so this example that I'm going to talk about is kind of representative in this visual of this steel frame construction. It had this very rigid, boxed in feeling. So at the time, I was using a very structured framework where all the roles were predefined. You know, outside of your Scrum teams, you know, you had your developers and testers and BAs and SMs, but then you had your system team and your product management team and your system architect, and then a whole bunch of teams that you shared, you know, information architecture, deployment operations, data engineering, configuration management. I mean, a lot of teams. But at the time, you know, we were just following along as prescribed with the structure without thinking about changing anything. Same with the activities, right? So it was safe. So we had the PI planning, you know, they had the iteration schedule that was prescribed at the time. You know, obviously SAFe has evolved a lot over the years. And so they followed all of those things. But as a result, there was no observable experimentation with this approach, and we were blindly moving forward within the structure. And so how this manifested to me was that in both the iteration retros that I participated in and the what I like call the big retro that includes all of the teams, suggestions were made, but I didn't observe any changes happening that we proposed. So what I discovered out of that is that we needed to really encourage experimentation with the team processes, for individual teams and collectively as a group of teams. And then the lack of flexibility didn't allow to adjusting the framework itself. The teams needed room to change structures that just weren't working for them. All right, so in this example, at the peak of applying and creating your own path, I would say that it's very similar to this visual of like a beach fencing, right? Where there is some structure, but it was very minimal and very pliable and very flexible. So for this example, at Secret Service and at US courts, they were using Scrum, but not a formalized or predefined scaling framework. So they were free to experiment with lots of things. So for example, at Secret Service, they experimented with team structure. So they had a tech lead for each team. For retros, they had a collective team retro with the teams, but no individual team retros. And then for testing, they did obviously test automation in one team, not in other teams. And at US courts, what they did was they changed the structure and how they coordinated with testing. Now, the setup itself of having separate testing was not ideal, but they experimented with that with how best they could. So they experimented with their length of sprints, and they also did the same collective team retro with no individual retros. So what this resulted in was that it was the less scaffolding they had around scaling, the teams really didn't restrict themselves in what they could try to experiment with. And experimenting was just not on the team processes, but also on the structure that gave them space to learn and improve, an approach not normally considered. And then teams gained some autonomy with this kind of control on experimenting. But at the same time, they were still working towards the same project goals. And then, they evolved the structure based on what they learned from their experiments. They learned what did and didn't work with the approach they were taking. US courts, they changed the length of their sprints to work with test coordination. And then, they liked the collective team retro structure, so they kept that. But ultimately customizing their framework for what the teams needed influenced their pace of progress. All right. So after all that trekking through peaks and valleys, where did that really get us? Really, the message I'm just trying to share here is to keep discovering, let the journey and what you learn along the way be the focus of your Agile scaling adventure. These factors that I've described would not be very easy to implement in an established organization, but it's crucial to try so that you make sure that Agile scaling helps and doesn't hinder your success. So the path to your goals are not going to be direct, but you have to recognize that every twist and turn is an intentional pursuit of new opportunities to grow. So before I end the session, of the 3 factors, I want you to think about which one will you commit to trying out? Will you think about communicating your vision consistently, looking for opportunities to radiate your vision and to keep alignment amongst your teams and product owners? Or are you going to focus on your people genuinely, looking for opportunities to give them more decision-making powers and create those collaborative, cooperative environments so that they can truly be empowered to work better together? Or are you going to focus on creating your path intentionally? Inspect and adapt not just the team practices, but also your scaling approach, and keep what's working and change or remove what's not. and to evolve as your organization, program, or project evolves. So what I want you to do is to put in the chat box either vision, people, or path to indicate which one you're going to think about trying to make a move on in any little way. You know, just think about where do you have the biggest growth opportunity. You know, if you don't take the risk, you'll never know. Just try something different, and don't get too stuck on the how at the start. So I'm looking here and I see a lot of people talking about focusing on the people. Yeah, that's awesome. Some people talking about path. I see a lot of people talking about people. Yeah. Yeah, give it a try. And then I would just say, connect with me and share with me what happened. You know, what did you try? Or, you know, if you want to ask some more questions, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And the one last thing that I would just mention here is that a little over a year ago, some of my Excella colleagues and I created this manifesto for scaling agility, which includes some of the things that I shared with you today. So please check it out. We're also interested in hearing feedback. We've had some feedback from thought leaders in the Agile community, and we also welcome your feedback as well. So please let me know if you want to join our Slack space. And with that, I will stop talking and let people ask questions if they have questions for me. Or put something in the chat.
Does anyone have any questions for Nicole? Okay, thank you, Nicole. We appreciate you taking time to come and be a part of our miniVAte. We really enjoyed your talk. So if no one has any questions, we would just take a quick break and wait and transition to 4 o'clock. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for participating. Appreciate it.
Thank you.